Welcome, dear traveller, to another journey through time with sleepless survivors. Tonight we invite you to rest your mind and body as we drift through the ancient sands of Mesopotamia, exploring the lost cities that cradled civilization itself. Let the gentle rhythm of history carry you into peaceful sleep as we wander through Eridu, Uruk, and the forgotten places where humanity first learned to dream of permanence. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, let yourself sink into the comfort of your bed as we begin our voyage to a time before memory, to the land between two rivers. Part 1. The Cradle, Between Two Rivers. The story begins with water, always with water. In a landscape where the sun bleaches the earth to pale gold and the sky stretches endlessly blue, two rivers carve their ancient paths through the desert. The Tigris and Euphrates, twin arteries of life, flowing from the mountains of Anatolia down through the flat plains toward the Persian Gulf. Mesopotamia. The name itself whispers of antiquity. From the Greek words meaning between rivers, this land became the stage for humanity's greatest transformation. Here, somewhere around 6,000 years ago, people began to gather in numbers never before seen. They built structures that touched the sky. They invented writing. They created laws. They told stories that would echo through millennia. But before all of this, before the great kings and the towering ziggurats, there was silence. There was the slow movement of nomadic peoples following the rains, the quiet rustle of reed shelters in the wind, the patient flow of the rivers making their way to the sea. Let yourself imagine that silence, the vast openness of the ancient world, no cities, no roads, only the land and the sky and the water, eternal and patient. The climate then was different from today. The Persian Gulf extended much farther inland, creating vast marshlands rich with fish and waterfowl. Reeds grew in impossible abundance, tall as a man and thick as forests. Date palms offered sweet fruit and shade. The rivers overflowed their banks each spring, depositing rich silt across the floodplains, dark soil perfect for cultivation. It was paradise in its way, a garden between the waters, and slowly, gradually, people began to understand that here they might stay. Here they might build something that would last. The first settlements appeared like islands in the marshes, small clusters of reed huts, their walls woven tight against the wind, their roofs thatched with more reeds from the endless supply around them. Families lived here, perhaps 20 or 30 people, fishing in the shallows, hunting birds, gathering the seeds of wild grasses. They noticed something important about those grasses. When the seeds fell to the ground, new plants grew. When people harvested the seeds and scattered some in places they chose, the plants grew there too. This simple observation would change everything. But we moved too, quickly. Rest now in this moment of discovery. Feel the warm sun on ancient skin. Hear the rustle of reeds in the breeze. Watch the patient flow of brown water moving through green marshlands. This is where everything begins. Part 2, Eridu, the first city. In the southernmost reaches of Mesopotamia, where the rivers came closest to the sea, there arose a settlement that would claim a special place in history. Its name was Eridu. In later times, the Sumerians would call it the first city in the world, the place where kingship descended from heaven. Whether Eridu was truly the first city, we cannot say with certainty, but it was undoubtedly among the earliest, and it grew into something remarkable. Around 5400 BCE, people began building here in earnest. Not just reed huts now, but structures of mud brick dried in the sun until hard as stone. The settlement clustered around a holy place, a temple. Even in these earliest days, humanity felt the need to create spaces dedicated to forces beyond themselves. The first temple at Eridu was small, a single room perhaps 15 feet across, but it was built with purpose and care. Its walls were oriented to the cardinal directions. Its doorway faced the rising sun. Inside, an altar stood ready for offerings. Outside, the people lived their lives, but this space was different, sacred, set apart. It was dedicated to Enki, the god of fresh water, of wisdom, of the underground ocean that the Sumerians believed lay beneath the earth, the source of all springs and rivers. Let yourself drift into that ancient temple. The air is cool inside the mud brick walls, sheltered from the brutal sun. Light filters through the doorway, golden and soft. The smell of incense lingers, mixing with the earthen scent of the walls. Outside, you hear the distant sounds of the settlement. Voices calling, children laughing, the clang of pottery being shaped. But here, there is peace, a sense of something greater than the everyday struggle for survival. In this small space, humanity reached beyond itself, grasping for meaning and connection to the divine. The temple at Eridu would be rebuilt many times over the next 1,000 years. Each time it grew larger, more elaborate. Eventually it would sit atop a raised platform, lifting it above the ordinary dwellings, a mountain made by human hands. But that comes later. For now, it is small and simple, yet filled with significance. Around the temple, the city grew. Families built houses clustered together, their walls shared for efficiency and protection. Narrow lanes wound between the dwellings, barely wide enough for 2 people to pass. In open spaces, craftspeople worked, potters shaping clay, weavers creating textiles from flax and wool, toolmakers fashioning implements from stone and bone. The people of Eridu developed pottery of distinctive style. They painted their vessels with geometric patterns and flowing designs, dark paint on light clay. These pots held grain and water, oil and dates. They were traded far and wide, carrying the identity of Eridu across the landscape. But more than pots and houses, Eridu represented something new in human organisation. Here, people lived not just in family groups, but as part of a larger community. They coordinated their labour. They built irrigation channels to bring water from the rivers to their fields. They stored surplus grain against times of shortage. They developed social hierarchies, with some people becoming priests, others administrators, still others maintaining their traditional roles as farmers and craftspeople. This was civilization emerging, like a flower from fertile soil. Not perfect, certainly. There would be conflicts and inequalities, struggles for power and resources. But there was also cooperation on a scale never before achieved. There was the possibility of leisure, of some people having time to think and create beyond the constant demands of survival. There was the birth of art, of literature, of complex thought. Imagine walking through Eridu at dawn, 5,000 years ago. The air is still cool from the night. Smoke rises from cooking fires, carrying the smell of barley porridge and baked fish. A priest makes his way toward the temple, ready to perform the morning rituals. Workers head out to the fields, hoes over their shoulders. Children chase each other between the houses, their laughter bright in the growing light. The city is alive. It breathes with human presence. And yet it is small by our standards, perhaps holding a few thousand people at most. Everyone knows everyone. The bonds of kinship and community are strong. This is a world where the sacred and the mundane intertwine, where every action has significance, where the patterns of life follow the cycles of the seasons and the favour of the gods. At night, when darkness falls and the stars emerge in their countless multitudes, the people of Eridu look up at the same sky we do. They see the same constellations, though they tell different stories about them. They wonder about the same mysteries. Where do we come from? Why are we here? What happens when we die? And in their temple they seek answers. They make offerings to Enki, the wise god who shaped humanity from clay, who gave them knowledge and skills. They perform rituals passed down from their ancestors. They maintain the connection between earth and heaven, between the human and the divine. Sleep now in ancient Eridu. Feel the security of thick mud brick walls around you. Rest on a woven mat, a simple but comfortable bed. Outside, the night watchman makes his rounds, calling out that all is well. In the distance, a dog barks once, then falls silent. The city sleeps, as you sleep, under the eternal stars. Part 3. The Rise of Uruk. Time passes, as time always does. Generations come and go. The children of Eridu have children of their own, who have children in turn. The cities of Mesopotamia multiply and grow. New settlements appear along the rivers. Trade routes connect them. Ideas flow along with goods. And then, around 4000 BCE, something remarkable happens. A city begins to grow that will dwarf all others. A city that will become the largest urban centre in the world. A city whose name will ring through history and myth. That city is Uruk. Uruk rises in the southern alluvial plain, not far from Eridu but positioned to take advantage of both rivers through a network of canals. The land here is flat and fertile, perfect for agriculture. The rivers provide fish and transportation, and the people who gather here are ambitious, innovative, driven to create something unprecedented. At first, Uruk is just another settlement among many, but it has advantages. Its location allows it to control trade routes, its fields are particularly productive, and somehow, through a combination of factors both material and cultural, it begins to grow at an extraordinary rate. By 3500 BCE, Uruk covers nearly 250 acres. Its population numbers in the tens of thousands, an almost unimaginable concentration of humanity for the time. People come from smaller villages, drawn by opportunities for work, for trade, for participation in something greater than themselves. The city becomes a magnet, pulling in talent and ambition from across the region. The architecture of Uruk reflects its ambitions. The city is dominated by two great temple complexes. One is dedicated to Anu, the sky god, king of the gods. The other belongs to Inanna, the goddess of love and war, of fertility and destruction, the most complex and fascinating deity in the Sumerian pantheon. The Inanna temple district, dedicated to Inanna, becomes a sprawling complex of buildings and courtyards. Here, pillars decorated with coloured clay cones create geometric patterns that shimmer in the sunlight. Walls are painted with murals showing the goddess and her sacred animals. The architecture is experimental, bold, pushing the boundaries of what can be built with mud brick and human labour. Let yourself wander through the Inanna precinct. The scale is overwhelming. Buildings rise higher than any you've seen before. Courtyards stretch vast enough to hold thousands of people during festivals. The walls are decorated with red, white and black mosaic patterns, each cone painstakingly set by hand into the wet mud plaster. You pass through a gateway into an inner courtyard. The sun is high overhead, beating down with Mediterranean intensity. But the buildings provide shade, and there is a quality of coolness here, a sense of being in a sacred space apart from the ordinary world. Priests move about their business, dressed in long white robes. Servants carry offerings, baskets of dates, jars of beer, cuts of meat from sacrificed animals. In the centre of the complex, the temple itself rises on a high platform. To reach it, you must climb a monumental staircase, each step asserting the distance between the human and the divine. At the top, the doorway beckons, dark and mysterious. Inside, the goddess waits, present in her cult statue, receiving the devotion of her people. But Uruk is more than just temples. It is a thriving urban centre, a place of commerce and craft, of administration and innovation. In workshops throughout the city, artisans create objects of beauty and utility. Potters shape clay on the wheel, a new invention that allows for faster, more uniform production. Metalworkers experiment with copper and bronze, learning to cast tools and weapons of unprecedented sharpness and strength. Weavers create textiles so fine they're almost transparent, destined for the wealthy and the priesthood. The streets of Uruk are narrow and winding, following no grid pattern, growing organically as the city expands. Houses cluster together, sharing walls, their roofs flat and usable as additional living space in the cool of evening. Wealthy families have larger homes arranged around central courtyards, with rooms for storage, for cooking, for sleeping, for receiving guests. The poor make do with smaller spaces, sometimes just a single room, but even they are part of the urban fabric, contributing their labour to the city's prosperity. Markets bustle with activity. Farmers bring produce from the surrounding fields, barley and wheat, onions and lentils, dates and pomegranates. Fishermen offer the day's catch from the rivers and canals. Merchants display goods from far away, shells from the Persian Gulf, obsidian from Anatolia, copper from the mountains, precious stones from distant lands. The air fills with voices haggling, laughing, arguing, negotiating. This is the sound of commerce, of human interaction, of civilization in full flower. And beneath all of this activity, supporting it and organising it, is something revolutionary: writing. Uruk is where writing is invented, or perhaps refined from earlier token systems, but here it takes the form that will evolve into the cuneiform script used throughout Mesopotamia for thousands of years. At first it is purely practical, a tool for record keeping. Temple administrators need to track offerings, to record how much grain has been received, how many sheep sacrificed, how much wool produced. They press reed styluses into soft clay tablets, making marks that represent numbers and objects. But from these simple beginnings, something profound emerges. The marks begin to represent not just things, but ideas, sounds, words. Stories can be told in symbols. Knowledge can be preserved beyond the fragility of human memory. The voice of a person can speak across years, across centuries, through marks in clay. Imagine holding a tablet from ancient Uruk, one of the earliest written documents in human history. The clay is cool and dry in your hands, baked hard by the sun or by fire. On its surface, the marks are still crisp and clear, wedge-shaped impressions forming pictures and symbols. This tablet records a delivery of grain to the temple, a mundane economic transaction. But it is also something more. It is humanity learning to speak across time, to create memory that lasts beyond life. The people who created this tablet, who developed this system of writing, were not so different from us. They had the same capacity for thought, the same intelligence, the same range of emotions. What they lacked was the accumulated knowledge of generations. They were figuring everything out for the first time, inventing the tools that we take for granted. And one of those tools, perhaps the most important one, was the ability to write. As night falls over Uruk, the city transforms. Torches and oil lamps flicker in windows and doorways, creating pools of warm light in the darkness. The day's heat dissipates, and people emerge onto their rooftops to catch the evening breeze. Families share meals. Friends gather to talk and laugh. Musicians play lyres and drums. Singers chant ancient songs, telling stories of gods and heroes. In the temple district, the evening rituals proceed with solemn ceremony. Priests make offerings to Inanna, lighting incense, pouring libations, speaking prayers in the sacred language. The goddess is present, watching over her city, blessing her people. Or so the worshippers believe, and their belief shapes their reality, gives meaning to their lives, binds them together in common purpose. High above the city the moon rises, waxing or waning in its eternal cycle. The people of Uruk track these cycles carefully. Their calendar is based on lunar months. The movements of the moon and stars are portents, signs of divine will, indicators of favourable and unfavourable times for various undertakings. The heavens and the earth are connected, part of a single cosmic order, and you, drifting towards sleep in your own time and place, are connected to them across the millennia. The same moon they watched shines on you. The same human concerns animate your life. The need for security, for community, for meaning. We are not so far removed from the people of ancient Uruk. We are their inheritors, carrying forward the civilization they began. Rest now in the cool Mesopotamian night. Let the sounds of the ancient city fade into the background. Feel yourself suspended between wakefulness and sleep, between past and present, between the mundane and the sacred. Part 4. Kings and Heroes. As Uruk grows and prospers, it begins to coalesce around central figures. Leaders emerge who command respect and obedience, who organize labour for great projects, who represent the city in dealings with other settlements. These leaders are both practical administrators and sacred figures, intermediaries between humans and gods. They are the first kings. Later Sumerian tradition preserves a list of early kings, though how much is history and how much is legend remains unclear. The list claims that kingship itself descended from heaven after the Great Flood, landing first at one city, then passing to another as the cities rose and fell in dominance. Uruk appears on this list with several kings, the most famous of whom is Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh. The name resonates even now, 4,000 years after his time. Was he a real person? Probably. There was likely a king of Uruk named Gilgamesh who ruled around 2700 BCE, but the man was transformed by legend into something more, a hero of superhuman strength and beauty, 2/3 god and 1/3 human, who built the walls of Uruk and sought immortality. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest works of literature in existence, tells his story. It was written down in various versions over many centuries, copied by scribes, preserved in libraries, buried in the ruins of ancient cities to be discovered millennia later by archaeologists. Through these clay tablets, the voice of ancient Mesopotamia speaks to us directly. Let me tell you the story as it might have been recounted in ancient Uruk, in the cool of evening, with listeners gathered close to hear the tale. Not word for word from any text, but the essence of the story, the journey of a hero seeking meaning in a mortal life. Gilgamesh was king of Uruk, mighty and magnificent, but also arrogant and tyrannical. He oppressed his people, taking what he wanted, showing no respect for others. The people cried out to the gods for relief, and the gods responded by creating a wild man, Enkidu, who lived among the animals in the steppe beyond the city. When Gilgamesh heard of this wild man, he sent a temple priestess to civilize him. She spent 7 days with Enkidu, teaching him the ways of humanity. The animals who had been his companions now fled from him, for he had crossed the boundary between wild and civilized. He returned with the priestess to Uruk. In the city, Gilgamesh and Enkidu met and fought, testing each other's strength. They were evenly matched, and their contest ended in mutual respect. They became companions, deep friends, brothers in all but blood. Together they had adventures. They travelled to the cedar forest and slew the demon Humbaba. They killed the Bull of Heaven when it was sent to destroy the city. But the gods were angered by these deeds, and they decreed that Enkidu must die. He fell ill, and after suffering for many days, passed away. Gilgamesh was devastated. He had never known such grief. He mourned his friend extravagantly, and more than that, he confronted for the first time his own mortality. If Enkidu, so strong and vital, could die, then so too could Gilgamesh. Unable to accept this truth, Gilgamesh set out on a quest to find eternal life. He journeyed beyond the known world, into regions of darkness and danger. He crossed the waters of death. He found Utnapishtim, the one human whom the gods had granted immortality after surviving the Great Flood. From him, Gilgamesh sought the secret of eternal life. Utnapishtim told Gilgamesh that immortality was not for humans to possess. The gods had granted it to him as a special exception, never to be repeated. But seeing Gilgamesh's determination, he revealed the location of a plant that could restore youth. Gilgamesh found the plant and began the journey home, but while he was bathing, a serpent stole the plant and ate it, gaining the ability to shed its skin and renew itself. Gilgamesh returned to Uruk empty-handed but transformed. He had sought immortality and failed, but he had learned something more valuable. He looked at his city with new eyes, seeing the greatness of what he and his people had built. The walls of Uruk would stand long after he was gone. The works of his hands, the laws he had established, the city he had ruled, these would endure. This was the only immortality available to mortals, to create something that outlasts the brief span of life. This story, told and retold around countless fires, refined through many tellings, eventually written on clay tablets and preserved in libraries, speaks to something fundamental in the human experience. We are conscious of our mortality in a way that other creatures are not. We know that we will die, and this knowledge shapes everything we do. We seek meaning, legacy, connection to something greater than our individual lives. The people of ancient Uruk grappled with these questions just as we do. They told stories to make sense of their existence. They built monumental architecture to assert their presence in the face of oblivion. They created art and literature to speak across the gap of death, and in doing so, they achieved a form of immortality. Here we are, thousands of years later, still telling their stories, still marvelling at their achievements, still learning from their insights. Breathe deeply. Let the ancient world wash over you like a gentle tide. You are lying in a palace in Uruk, on a bed covered with fine linens. The night air is warm but comfortable. Through an open window you can hear the distant sounds of the city. A dog barking, voices in conversation, the splash of water in a fountain. Somewhere someone is playing a lyre, the notes floating on the breeze. You are safe here, protected by walls built to last, part of a civilization that believes it will endure forever. And in a way it has. Through the stories it told and the marks it made, through the ruins it left behind and the seeds it planted, ancient Uruk lives on. Let sleep come naturally. Let your breathing slow and deepen. Let your muscles relax, releasing all tension. You're held by the same earth that held the people of Uruk. You're watched by the same stars. You're part of the same grand story of humanity, reaching from the past into the future. Part 5. The Sumerian World. Beyond Eridu and Uruk, other cities flourished throughout southern Mesopotamia. Each had its own character, its own patron deity, its own contribution to the emerging civilization. Together, they formed a network of city-states that we call Sumer. Rose near the Persian Gulf, becoming a major centre of trade and religion. Its ziggurat, a massive stepped pyramid built around 2100 BCE, dominated the landscape. Dedicated to the moon god Nana, it was constructed with millions of mud bricks, its core solid, its outer shell faced with baked bricks set in bitumen. Staircases on 3 sides led to the top, where a temple chamber housed the god's cult statue. Imagine climbing those stairs on a cool evening, ascending toward the heavens. Each step takes you higher above the city spread below. The houses become smaller, the streets less distinct. People appear as tiny figures going about their business. You can see the rivers in the distance, ribbons of brown water, and beyond them, the flat expanse of agricultural fields, green with crops, crisscrossed with irrigation channels. At the summit, you enter the temple chamber. The ceiling is low, the space intimate despite the grandeur of the structure supporting it. The walls are whitewashed, brilliant in the light of oil lamps. The air smells of incense and offering bread. In an alcove, the statue of Nana stands, silver-bearded, benevolent, watching over his city with serene eyes. The priests perform their evening ritual, chanting prayers in Sumerian, a language unlike any other, neither Semitic nor Indo-European, a linguistic isolate, unique. The words flow in patterns both ancient and formal, each syllable precisely articulated. This is the language of power, of learning, of connection to the divine. Even when Sumerian ceased to be spoken in daily life, it remained the language of scholarship and religion, like Latin in medieval Europe. The Sumerians were remarkable not just for what they built, but for what they thought. They developed mathematics, using a sexagesimal system, base 60, which is why we still divide hours into 60 minutes and circles into 360 degrees. They created elaborate legal codes, prescribing punishments for various crimes, establishing the principle that society operated under law, not just the arbitrary will of rulers. They composed love poetry and lamentations, wisdom literature and hymns to the gods. Their literature reveals people deeply thoughtful about life's meaning. They wrestled with questions of justice and suffering, prosperity and misfortune. Why do the wicked sometimes prosper while the righteous suffer? Why do children die while the elderly linger? What obligations do the rich owe to the poor? What makes a good leader? How should one live to find satisfaction? These are not the questions of primitive people. They are the questions of a sophisticated civilization grappling with the complexities of human existence. And the answers the Sumerians proposed, while framed in their own cultural context, often resonate with modern sensibilities. They valued education highly. Schools called tablet houses taught boys to read and write cuneiform, to do mathematics, to know the hymns and prayers, to understand the movements of celestial bodies. Training was rigorous and discipline strict, but those who mastered the curriculum became scribes, one of the most prestigious professions. A scribe could serve in the temple administration, in the palace bureaucracy, or as a private secretary to wealthy families. Knowledge was literally power in Sumerian society. Let yourself enter a tablet house, becoming a student for a moment. You sit on a low bench, a wooden board across your lap serving as a desk. Before you is a pile of fresh clay, malleable and ready to be shaped. You roll a piece into a flat rectangle, smoothing its surface with your palm. The teacher walks among the students, dictating a text, an ancient hymn that generations of students have copied before you. You take your stylus, a cut reed with a triangular tip, and begin to press it into the clay, making the wedge-shaped marks that form cuneiform signs. The work requires concentration and precision. Each sign must be clearly formed, properly sized, correctly placed. Mistakes can be smoothed away if caught quickly, but it's better to work carefully and avoid errors. The day is long. You copy texts, practice mathematical problems, recite passages from memory. Your hand cramps, your neck aches from bending over your work, but you persist, driven by the knowledge that literacy opens doors, that education is the path to a better life, and there is satisfaction in the work itself, in the mastery of a complex system, in joining the ranks of those who can speak across time through written words. Beyond the cities, the Mesopotamian landscape was dotted with smaller settlements and worked fields. Farmers rose with the sun, heading out to tend barley and wheat, to check irrigation ditches, to weed and harvest according to the season. Their work was the foundation of everything. The surplus grain they produced fed the urban populations, supported the priests and scribes, the craftspeople and merchants, the kings and their courts. The relationship between city and countryside was symbiotic but also hierarchical. The cities dominated, drawing resources from the hinterlands, imposing obligations and taxes. Yet the cities also provided markets for agricultural surplus, protection from raids, judicial services, religious facilities. It was a complex system, not always fair, sometimes exploitative, but remarkably durable. Water management was crucial. The rivers flooded unpredictably, sometimes too much, sometimes too little. Successful agriculture required controlling this water, storing it when abundant, channeling it when needed. The Sumerians became master hydraulic engineers, constructing networks of canals, reservoirs, and drainage ditches that transformed the landscape. These projects required coordination and labour on a massive scale, which in turn reinforced the power of central authorities. As evening approaches in ancient Sumer, workers return from the fields. The heat of the day dissipates. Families gather for the evening meal: barley bread, lentil stew, onions, fish if it's available, dates for sweetness. They drink beer, the beverage of choice, brewed from barley, drunk through long straws to avoid the sediment. Beer was not just recreational but nutritious, providing calories and vitamins that made it almost a food in itself. After eating, there is time for rest, for conversation, for the small pleasures of life. Parents play with children, friends share gossip, elders tell stories of the old days, passing down the accumulated wisdom of generations. This is the texture of ordinary life, the daily routine that persists beneath the grand narratives of kings and conquests. The night deepens, stars emerge, brilliant against the dark sky. The Sumerians are skilled astronomers, tracking the movements of celestial bodies, identifying planets, noting the cycles of eclipses. They see the heavens as a cosmic tablet on which the gods write messages. Learning to read these messages is a form of divination, a way to anticipate the future and align human actions with divine will. Sleep comes to Sumer. In houses throughout the land, people lie down on woven mats or simple beds. They pull light covers over themselves against the night's coolness. They close their eyes and drift into dreams, processing the experiences of the day, travelling in imagination to realms both familiar and strange. And you too drift with them. Feel the ancient world become gossamer thin, a veil between waking and sleeping. Your breathing is slow and steady. Your body is relaxed and heavy. You are suspended in time, connected to the past, resting in the present, moving gently toward the peace of deep sleep. Part 6. The Art of Ancient Mesopotamia. The people of ancient Mesopotamia were not merely practical engineers and administrators. They were artists, driven by the same creative impulses that motivate artists today. Their work survives in museums around the world, offering us glimpses into their aesthetic sensibilities and cultural values. Mesopotamian art is distinctive. It values symmetry and order. It tends toward the formal and hieratic rather than the naturalistic. Human figures are often shown in stylized poses, their features conventionalized according to established patterns. Kings and gods are depicted as larger than ordinary people, their importance indicated by their size. Eyes are often exaggerated, wide and staring, perhaps to suggest watchfulness or wisdom. The standard of Ur, discovered in the royal cemetery at Ur and dating to around 2500 BCE, exemplifies Sumerian artistic achievement. It's a wooden box inlaid with lapis lazuli, red limestone and shell, showing scenes of war on one side and peace on the other. The figures are arranged in horizontal registers, telling stories through visual narrative. On the war side, soldiers march in orderly rows, carrying spears and leading prisoners. Chariots run over fallen. Enemies? The king, larger than his soldiers, stands in review receiving captives. The scene is brutal but also formal, transforming violence into pattern and order. On the peace side, a banquet is in progress. Figures sit in rows, drinking beer through long straws, listening to a musician playing a lyre. Servants bring animals and goods, offerings for the feast. The king again appears largest, central, presiding over the celebration. This is the reward for victory, the prosperity that comes from successful warfare and domination. The standard of Ur speaks to us across the centuries. It shows a society organised for warfare, hierarchical, valuing martial achievement. But it also shows a people who feasted and celebrated, who enjoyed music and companionship, who found pleasure in beauty and craftsmanship. They were complex, as all people are, capable of both violence and joy. Imagine holding a piece of lapis lazuli from ancient Mesopotamia. This deep blue stone, valued more than gold, came from mountains in distant Afghanistan, transported across vast distances through trade networks spanning thousands of miles. Its presence in Sumerian art speaks to the interconnectedness of the ancient world, the far-reaching contacts that brought rare materials to craftspeople who transformed them into objects of beauty. The stone is cool and smooth, polished to a high sheen. Its colour is intense, almost otherworldly, flecked with gold-coloured pyrite that catches the light. To the Sumerians, this stone represented the night sky, the heavenly realm where gods dwelled. Wearing lapis lazuli jewellery, or owning objects decorated with it, connected the owner to the divine sphere. Cylinder seals are another characteristic art form of ancient Mesopotamia. These small cylinders of stone, usually 1 to 2 inches long, were carved with intricate designs in negative relief. When rolled across soft clay, they left positive impressions, unique signatures that could authenticate documents or seal containers. The skill required to carve these tiny seals was extraordinary. Using bronze tools and abrasive powders, artists cut elaborate scenes into hard stones like hematite or chalcedony. The scenes often depict religious rituals, mythological narratives, or presentation scenes where a worshipper is led into the presence of a god by an intermediary deity. Each seal was unique, personal to its owner. Important people had elaborate seals carved by master artists. Ordinary people might have simpler designs. But everyone who participated in the economy needed a seal, for Mesopotamian business was conducted through sealed contracts, signed with the roll of a cylinder seal on a clay tablet or envelope. Let yourself become a seal cutter, working in your small shop in ancient Ur. Before you is a cylinder of carnelian, warm orange-red, translucent when held to light. Your patron has commissioned a seal showing himself being presented to Shamash, the sun god and god of justice. It's a standard scene, but you'll personalize it with details specific to your patron. You begin by sketching the design on a piece of broken pottery, working out the composition. The figures must fit the cylindrical space, must be clear when rolled, must convey the appropriate dignity and reverence. Satisfied with your sketch, you begin cutting, working slowly and carefully. The stone is hard, the work painstaking. Days will pass before the seal is complete. As you work, you enter a state of deep concentration, the world narrowing to the stone in your hand, the tool moving across its surface, the emerging image. This is meditation through craft, finding peace in focused attention, satisfaction in skill applied to create something beautiful and useful. Sculpture in the round also flourished in Mesopotamia. Statues of worshippers, hands clasped in prayer, were placed in temples to offer perpetual devotion on behalf of their patrons. These figures have large eyes, rapt expressions, bodies simplified into geometric forms. They stand or sit in attitudes of reverence, eternal witnesses to the divine presence. These statues served as substitutes, allowing the wealthy to maintain a constant presence before the gods even while attending to worldly business. Place your statue in the temple, and part of you remains there always, praying, offering devotion, maintaining your relationship with the divine powers that controlled fate and fortune. The sculptors who created these figures worked in various stones: limestone, alabaster, gypsum, each with its own qualities and challenges. They learned to see the figure within the stone, to remove what was unnecessary to reveal the essential form. Their work was constrained by convention, by religious requirements, by the expectations of patrons. Yet within these constraints, individual skill and vision could still emerge. Rest in the presence of these ancient artworks. Let them speak to you of human aspiration, of the desire to create beauty, to leave a mark, to participate in something eternal. These objects were made by hands like yours, shaped by minds grappling with the same questions about meaning and legacy. They bridge the gulf of time, connecting us to our ancient ancestors through the universal language of art. Part 7. Daily life in Mesopotamian cities. Let us descend from the temples and palaces, from the grand narratives of kings and the elevated realm of art, and walk among ordinary people in their daily lives. For most residents of ancient Mesopotamia, life was not about great deeds or artistic achievement, but about the practical necessities of existence: securing food, maintaining shelter, raising children, participating in community. A typical family in a Mesopotamian city lived in a modest house of mud brick. The structure faced inward, with few windows opening to the street, protecting privacy and providing security. The main room surrounded a central courtyard, open to the sky, which served as the heart of domestic life. Here, cooking was done, children played, household tasks were accomplished. The day began early, before the sun rose high enough to make outdoor work unbearable. The housewife ground barley into flour, a laborious task requiring a stone quern and strong arms. She mixed the flour with water to make dough, which she shaped into flat loaves and baked in a clay oven. The smell of baking bread filled the courtyard, announcing that the day's food was being prepared. Meanwhile, her husband might already have left for work. If he was a craftsman, he headed to his workshop. If a labourer, he reported to whatever project required workers that day, perhaps digging or cleaning a canal, perhaps working on a temple construction, perhaps harvesting in the fields. His labour earned him rations of barley and oil, the basic currency of survival, occasionally supplemented with small amounts of silver for larger purchases. Children too young to work stayed with their mother, helping with age-appropriate tasks, watching younger siblings, fetching water from the neighbourhood well, running small errands. Older boys might apprentice to a craft or attend school if the family could afford it. Girls learned domestic skills from their mothers, preparing for their future roles as wives and household managers. Education for girls was rare but not unknown. Some women became scribes, priestesses, or tavern keepers, roles that required literacy and numeracy. But for most, life revolved around the domestic sphere, weaving cloth, preparing food, managing household resources, raising children. Let yourself inhabit the life of a Mesopotamian woman for a moment. You sit in your courtyard, a basket of wool beside you, a spindle in your hands. The motion is rhythmic, almost automatic, practiced through years of repetition. The spindle twists, the wool draws out into thread, uniform and strong. Your hands know what to do without conscious thought, leaving your mind free to wander. You think about your daughter, who will soon be of marriageable age. Negotiations have begun with a family you know, respectable people with a son who has good prospects. The marriage would benefit both families, creating alliances, pooling resources. You hope your daughter will be happy, but happiness is secondary to security, to the maintenance of social bonds that protect against disaster. You think about your son studying at the tablet house. The fees are high, a strain on the family budget, but literacy opens opportunities. Perhaps he'll become a scribe in a merchant house, earning enough to support you in your old age. This is the hope that drives the sacrifice. Around you, the sounds of the city create a constant background. Neighbours call to each other, street vendors cry their wares. Someone is singing, a work song, the melody drifting over courtyard walls. A baby cries, then quiets. A dog barks. Cartwheels creak on the street outside. This is the texture of urban life, dense with human presence, rarely silent. At midday, when the sun reaches its zenith, activity slows. The heat is oppressive. People retreat into the shadowy interiors of their houses, resting until the afternoon brings slightly cooler temperatures. This is the time for a nap, for quiet conversation, for respite from labour. The afternoon brings renewed activity. Markets are busiest now, as people shop for the evening meal. The marketplaces are crowded, chaotic, full of life. Here, everything is available. Fresh fish and dried fish, dates and date syrup, onions and garlic, lentils and chickpeas, sesame oil and animal fat, beer and wine, bread and cakes, wool and linen, copper tools and bronze weapons, pottery and baskets, jewellery and amulets. Merchants call out, advertising their goods. Customers haggle over prices, arguing, cajoling, sometimes walking away in pretended offence, often returning to negotiate further. Transactions are carefully weighed if they involve silver or precious metals. Deals are struck, hands are clasped, witnesses observed to ensure fairness. The marketplace is also a social hub, a place to encounter friends, to exchange gossip, to learn news from other cities. Information flows here as freely as goods. Who is marrying whom? Which merchant has recently prospered or failed? What are grain prices doing? Has the king made any new decrees? What do the priests say about upcoming festivals? Evening approaches. The sun, which has dominated the sky all day, finally descends toward the horizon. Its light shifts from harsh white to golden, then to orange and red. Long shadows stretch across the city. The air begins to cool. Relief comes with darkness. Families gather for the evening meal. This is the main meal of the day, when everyone eats together if possible. The menu is simple but nourishing. Barley bread, vegetable stew, perhaps some fish or meat if the family can afford it, dates for dessert. Beer accompanies the meal, its malty sweetness quenching thirst and providing calories. After eating, there is time for leisure. Men might gather in the street or courtyard to talk, to play board games, to share news. Women visit with neighbours, maintaining the social networks that are essential to survival. Children play until sleepiness overtakes them. As full darkness falls, oil lamps are lit. These simple devices, clay bowls with wicks floating in oil, provide just enough light to see by. The flickering flames create an intimate atmosphere, gathering shadows in corners, highlighting faces with warm illumination. Stories are told. Grandparents recount memories of their youth, preserving family history through oral tradition. Parents tell children the old tales, the myths of gods and heroes, the wisdom stories that teach proper behaviour. These narratives are the cultural glue that binds the community, passing values and knowledge from one generation to the next. Slowly, the household settles into sleep. Lamps are extinguished one by one. People lie down on their sleeping mats, cover themselves against the night's coolness, close their eyes. The city quiets, though it never falls completely silent. Night watchmen make their rounds. Sounds of animals carry from nearby pens. The occasional voice breaks the stillness. And in this quieting city, under these ancient stars, sleep comes. Dreams come, processing the day's experiences, weaving the fabric of unconscious thought. The cycle continues day after day, year after year, generation after generation. This is the rhythm of human life, unchanging in its essentials despite all surface differences. Let yourself join them. Feel the simple comfort of rest after a day of work. Feel the security of being part of a community, surrounded by family and neighbours. Feel the weight of 4,000 years fade away, recognizing that human experience remains fundamentally similar across time. We all need food and shelter. We all love our children. We all seek meaning and connection. We all must rest. Breathe deeply. Release tension from your shoulders, your back, your legs. Let your jaw relax, your eyes soften. You're safe. You're held by the earth. You're part of the great continuity of human life stretching from the ancient past into the unknown future. Sleep comes naturally when you stop resisting, when you allow yourself to sink into the present moment, accepting it fully. Part 8. The Gods of Mesopotamia. The people of ancient Mesopotamia lived in a world permeated by the divine. Gods were not distant abstractions, but active participants in earthly affairs, shaping events, demanding devotion, requiring propitiation. Understanding these gods helps us understand the people who worshipped them, their fears and hopes, their view of how the universe operated. At the head of the pantheon stood Anu, the sky god, distant and majestic. He was the source of kingship, the ultimate authority from whom all power derived. But Anu rarely intervened directly in earthly matters. He presided from his celestial realm, leaving more immediate concerns to other deities. Enlil, the god of wind and storm, held more practical power. He was the king of the gods in an active sense, the executor of divine decisions, the source of both blessings and disasters. Enlil could bring the spring rains that ensured good harvests, or he could send devastating storms that destroyed crops and cities. He was to be feared as much as honoured. Enki, the god of fresh water and wisdom, was the craftiest of the gods, the friend of humanity. He lived in the Apsu, the underground ocean of fresh water that was the source of all springs and rivers. Enki was credited with creating humans and with giving them the arts of civilization, agriculture, writing, craftsmanship, magic. He was clever, sometimes working against the harsher decrees of other gods to help humanity survive. Inanna, whom we have already encountered, was the Goddess of love and war, the morning and evening star, the embodiment of contradictions. She was beautiful and terrible, nurturing and destructive, devoted to her favourites and merciless to her enemies. Her myths depict a goddess who descends to the underworld, who loves and loses Dumuzi, who brings fertility to the land and passion to human hearts. These four were among the most important deities, but the Mesopotamian pantheon included hundreds of gods, each with specific domains and responsibilities. There were gods of cities, gods of crafts, gods of natural phenomena. Each temple had its patron deity, and each deity had his or her own cult, priesthood, and rituals. The relationship between humans and gods was essentially contractual. Gods required service, offerings of food and drink, the performance of rituals, the maintenance of temples, the proper observance of festivals. In return, they provided protection, prosperity, and order. If humans failed in their obligations, the gods might withdraw their favour, allowing disaster to strike. This worldview shaped Mesopotamian psychology. When things went wrong, when illness struck or crops failed or enemies invaded, the natural question was, what have we done to anger the gods? How have we failed in our obligations? Disasters were not random, but divine punishment for human failings. Conversely, success was evidence of divine favour. A prosperous king had clearly maintained good relations with the gods. A wealthy merchant was blessed by the deities of commerce. Success and divine approval were intertwined, each reinforcing the other. Imagine participating in a festival honouring Inanna in ancient Uruk. The day begins with a procession. The goddess's cult statue is carried from the inner sanctum of the temple, where normally only priests may go, out into public view. She's placed on a sacred boat, elaborately decorated, and carried through the streets by temple personnel. The crowds that line the route are enormous, for this is one of the great festivals of the year. Everyone who can possibly attend is present: merchants and farmers, scribes and craftspeople, soldiers and servants, rich and poor. They throw flowers before the goddess's boat. They sing hymns in her honour. They prostrate themselves as she passes. The procession moves through the city to the river, where the sacred boat is placed on an actual boat and floated to a special sanctuary outside the city walls. Here, ritual meals are prepared, offerings are made, prayers are recited. The priest performs sacred dramas, reenacting myths of the goddess, making present again the eternal patterns that structure reality. You watch, you participate, you feel yourself part of something immense and timeless. The goddess is present. You can feel her power, her attention. The boundary between earthly and divine grows thin. For a moment the mundane world is transfigured by the sacred. As night falls, the celebration continues. There is feasting, and music, dancing, and singing. Beer flows freely, lowering inhibitions, allowing for expressions of joy and ecstasy that everyday life constrains. This is sacred celebration, but it is also profoundly human, a release of tension, an affirmation of community, a statement that life is worth celebrating despite its difficulties. Such festivals punctuated the Mesopotamian year, creating rhythm and meaning. They marked agricultural seasons, commemorated mythological events, reinforced social hierarchies, and provided occasions for communal joy. They were essential to the functioning of society, bonding people together through shared ritual and belief. But religion was not just about public festivals and temple rituals, it also permeated private life. Individuals had personal gods, lesser deities who served as intermediaries between the person and the greater gods. These personal gods were entreated in times of trouble, thanked in times of success, maintained through small household shrines and daily devotions. Prayer was an important practice. Mesopotamians prayed to confess sins, to request blessings, to seek healing, to express gratitude. Their prayers, preserved on clay tablets, are remarkably personal and moving. They speak of suffering and hope, guilt and desire for redemption, fear and trust. They reveal people wrestling with existence, seeking help from powers greater than themselves. Let yourself rest in the presence of the divine as the Mesopotamians conceived it. Not a single, all-powerful deity distant from creation, but a multitude of gods, each with personality and power, each engaged with the world. The universe is not empty or indifferent, but alive with presence, with forces that respond to human action, with possibilities for relationship between mortal and immortal. This view brings both comfort and anxiety. Comfort because you are not alone in an uncaring cosmos, because help is available if you know the proper rituals and prayers. Anxiety because you can never be entirely certain of divine favour, because disasters might strike at any time if you unknowingly transgress divine law. But for now, set aside anxiety. Imagine yourself under the protection of the gods, your offerings accepted, your prayers heard. The goddess smiles on you. The gods of your city extend their favour. You are safe, held within the cosmic order, playing your small but significant role in the great pattern of existence. Sleep comes more easily when fear is assuaged, when you trust that you are protected. Let that trust, however foreign it might be to your usual beliefs, provide comfort now. Let yourself be held by powers greater than yourself, whether you name them gods or cosmos, or the mystery that underlies existence. Breathe, release, rest. The ancient gods watch over ancient Mesopotamia, and perhaps, in some sense, they watch still, their stories and influence echoing through the millennia, shaping the cultures that followed, contributing to the great river of human civilization that flows through time. Part 9. Writing and the Birth of Literature. We return to writing, to that revolutionary invention that transformed human civilization. Cuneiform script, pressed into clay tablets, became the medium through which Mesopotamian culture expressed itself, preserved itself, transmitted itself across time. The earliest writing was purely practical: economic records, administrative documents, lists of goods and quantities. But from these humble beginnings, writing evolved to capture the full range of human expression. Within a few centuries, scribes were recording myths and hymns, proverbs and love songs, medical texts and mathematical treatises, astronomical observations and astrological predictions, law codes and diplomatic correspondence. The library at Nineveh, assembled by the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal in the 7th century BCE, contained thousands of tablets covering every branch of knowledge. When archaeologists excavated the site in the 19th century, they found a buried treasure more valuable than gold, the preserved literature of ancient Mesopotamia. Among these tablets was the most complete version of the Epic of Gilgamesh, which we discussed earlier. But there were also many other works: the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation myth, describing how the god Marduk slayed the chaos dragon Tiamat and created the world from her corpse; the Descent of Inanna, telling how the goddess journeyed to the underworld and returned, dying and resurrecting; the Atrahasis epic, an earlier flood story that parallels the biblical narrative of Noah. There were hymns to various gods, elaborate poetic compositions praising divine attributes and recounting mythological deeds. There were royal inscriptions in which kings boasted of their achievements, listed their building projects, described their military conquests. There were wisdom texts, collections of proverbs and advice, attempts to codify the lessons of experience. Let yourself imagine the work of a scribe, copying one of these texts in a quiet scriptorium. Before you is a tablet freshly prepared, the clay soft and smooth. You have a stylus in your hand and a master text beside you from which you are copying. The text is the Epic of Gilgamesh. You have copied it before several times, for it is one of the standard works that students must learn. But each time you copy it, you notice something new, some nuance of language or story that you hadn't fully appreciated before. You begin. He who saw the deep, the foundation of the land, who knew the proper ways, was wise in all matters. The opening words of the epic, announcing its subject. Gilgamesh saw the deep, the abyss, the fundamental mysteries of existence. He returned to tell his story, and you are privileged to preserve that story, to ensure its survival for future generations. The work is slow. Each sign must be carefully formed. Cuneiform script is complex, with hundreds of signs, many having multiple readings depending on context. You must concentrate, must remain alert, must not allow your mind to wander. An error must be corrected immediately, before the clay dries, or the entire tablet might be ruined. Hours pass. Your hand cramps. Your back aches from bending over your work, but you persist, driven by pride in your craft and by the knowledge that you are doing something important. You're not just making marks in clay, you're preserving human wisdom, making knowledge immortal. When the tablet is complete, you set it aside to dry, then bake it in a kiln to harden it permanently. This tablet will outlast you. It will outlast your grandchildren's grandchildren. It will survive the fall of your city, the extinction of your culture, the forgetting of your language. 4,000 years from now, archaeologists will dig it from the ruins, scholars will decipher it, readers will encounter the story it tells. This is the miracle of writing. It allows the dead to speak. Through these clay tablets, the voices of ancient Mesopotamia reach us directly. We can read their own words, understand their thoughts, appreciate their artistry. The gulf of time does not silence them. The literature of Mesopotamia reveals a people grappling with the great questions of existence. The Epic of Gilgamesh is fundamentally about mortality and the search for meaning in a finite life. The Enuma Elish explains how order emerged from chaos, how civilization arose from savage nature. The hymns express wonder at divine power and beauty. The wisdom texts offer practical advice for navigating a complex world. There are also more intimate texts, letters between family members, expressing love and concern, reporting news, asking for favours, contracts documenting marriages, adoptions, business partnerships, land sales, legal judgments resolving disputes over property, inheritance and personal conduct. These documents reveal the texture of ordinary life, the daily concerns that occupied most people most of the time. One text, a complaint letter from a customer to a copper merchant, has survived nearly 4,000 years. The customer, Nani, writes to Ea-Nasir, complaining that the copper delivered was of inferior quality and that Ea-Nasir had treated Nani's servant rudely. The letter is remarkably similar to a modern complaint, aggrieved, indignant, demanding satisfaction. Reading it, we recognise a fellow human, someone wrestling with the same frustrations we might experience with a dishonest vendor. Such texts remind us that the ancient Mesopotamians were not exotic aliens, but people fundamentally like ourselves. They loved and fought, worked and played, worried and hoped. They faced injustice and sought remedy. They created beauty and appreciated it. They wondered about their place in the cosmos and sought answers through story and symbol. Literature was their way of wrestling with experience, of imposing order on chaos, of finding pattern and meaning in the flux of events. It served the same functions then as now, to entertain, to educate, to preserve memory, to explore possibility, to express the inexpressible. Rest now in the presence of these ancient texts. Imagine the countless tablets stacked in ancient libraries, each one containing knowledge, story, wisdom. Imagine the scribes who created them, working in quiet concentration, preserving the culture of their time. Imagine the teachers who taught the next generation to read, ensuring the survival of literacy. Imagine the readers who sought out these texts, hungry for knowledge, eager to connect with the words of the wise and the stories of heroes. You're part of this continuum. The fact that you are listening to this recording, that you seek knowledge and story, places you in direct lineage with those ancient readers. The human hunger for narrative, for understanding, for connection across time, this remains constant. Technology changes, but the essential human needs remain. Let this thought comfort you. You are not alone, not isolated in your brief moment of existence. You are part of humanity's great journey, connected to all who have come before and all who will come after. Your individual life is brief, but you participate in something vastly larger than yourself. Breathe deeply. Feel yourself held by the great continuity of human culture. The words spoken 4,000 years ago in ancient Sumer still resonate, still teach, still move us. And perhaps the words you speak, the marks you make, will also ripple forward through time, touching lives you cannot imagine. Sleep is near now. Your body is heavy with relaxation. Your mind drifts, released from the need to grasp and analyze. You float in that liminal space between waking and sleeping, between thought and dream. Let yourself sink deeper, trusting that sleep will come, that rest will refresh, that tomorrow you will wake renewed. Part 10. Mesopotamian Science and Mathematics. The ancient Mesopotamians were not just storytellers and artists. They were also scientists and mathematicians, observing the world carefully, seeking patterns, developing sophisticated systems for understanding and predicting natural phenomena. Astronomy was particularly advanced. Mesopotamian priests tracked the movements of celestial bodies with impressive precision. They identified the planets visible to the naked eye: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. They understood that these wandering stars moved against the background of fixed constellations. They calculated the synodic periods of the planets, the time it takes for each to return to the same position relative to Earth and Sun. They predicted lunar eclipses using the Saros cycle, a period of about 18 years after which eclipses repeat in predictable patterns. This discovery required careful observation over many generations, recording and analysing data, finding patterns in what initially seemed random. Why this intense interest in astronomy? Partly because the heavens were the realm of the gods, and understanding celestial movements was understanding divine intention. But also because astronomy had practical applications, determining the calendar, predicting seasonal changes, timing agricultural activities. The Mesopotamian calendar was lunar, based on months of 29 or 30 days. The time from one new moon to the next. 12 lunar months make about 354 days, 11 days short of a solar year. This discrepancy meant that the calendar gradually drifted out of alignment with the seasons. The solution was to add an extra month periodically, keeping the calendar synchronized with the agricultural year. Determining when to add this intercalary month required astronomical observation and mathematical calculation. It was the work of priestly astronomers, combining science and religion, careful observation and divine consultation. Mathematics in Mesopotamia was highly developed. The Sumerians and Babylonians used a sexagesimal system, counting in base 60. This seems strange to us, accustomed to base 10, but it has advantages. 60 is divisible by many numbers: 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, 30. This makes fraction calculations easier. We still use base 60 for measuring time and angles, a direct inheritance from Mesopotamia. When you say there are 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour, when you divide a circle into 360 degrees, you are using Mesopotamian mathematics. Mesopotamian mathematicians could solve complex problems. They had multiplication tables and tables of reciprocals. They could find square roots and cube roots. They solved quadratic equations. They calculated the areas of complex geometric figures. They developed algorithms for various types of calculations, step-by-step procedures that students learned and applied. Mathematical texts often presented problems in narrative form. A field of such and such dimensions with such and such yield per unit area produces how much grain. A wall of such and such height and thickness requires how many bricks. A silver alloy of such and such proportions contains how much pure silver. These problems trained students in practical calculation, preparing them for real-world applications in commerce, construction, and administration. But they also developed abstract mathematical thinking, exploring numerical relationships for their own sake, finding beauty in pattern and order. Imagine yourself working on a mathematical problem in ancient Babylon. You sit in a room in the tablet house, a mathematical problem before you written on a practice tablet. The problem involves calculating the area of an irregular field, broken into simpler geometric shapes: rectangles, triangles, trapezoids. You begin by sketching the field, dividing it visually into component shapes. Then you calculate the area of each shape using the formulas you have memorized: length times width for rectangles, half the base times the height for triangles. You add the areas together to find the total. The calculation requires careful attention. You work on a fresh clay tablet, writing out each step, showing your process. Your teacher will review your work, checking not just the final answer, but also your method, ensuring you understand the underlying principles, not just the rote application of formulas. When you finish, you feel satisfaction. The answer is correct. Your method's sound. You have solved a real problem using mathematical tools. This skill will serve you well, whether you become a merchant calculating profits, an architect designing buildings, or an administrator managing grain stores. Mesopotamian medicine was a mix of empirical observation and magical practice. Physicians carefully observed symptoms, categorized diseases, developed treatments based on experience. Medical texts list ailments and prescriptions. For fever, use such and such herbs. For wounds, apply such and such poultices. For digestive problems, administer such and such remedies. Some of these treatments were probably effective. Mesopotamian physicians had access to a wide pharmacopoeia, and some plant-based remedies have genuine medicinal properties. But treatment also involved spells and rituals. invoking gods and demons, seeking supernatural aid alongside natural remedies. The Mesopotamians understood disease in terms of divine displeasure or demonic possession. Illness was punishment for sin or the result of malevolent supernatural forces. Therefore, treatment required both physical medicine and spiritual intervention, confession of sins, performance of purification rituals, recitation of protective spells. This worldview seems superstitious to modern sensibilities, but it provided a framework for understanding suffering, a way to make sense of the random cruelties of disease and death. It also emphasized the connection between moral conduct and physical health, encouraging ethical behavior through fear of divine punishment manifested as illness. Let yourself rest in the intellectual world of ancient Mesopotamia, a world that sought order and pattern, that believed the universe operated according to comprehensible principles that valued knowledge and education, a world that looked up at the stars and saw not chaos but cosmic order, a world that used mathematics to solve problems and understand relationships, a world that sought healing through both practical and spiritual means. This world is not so distant from our own. We too seek patterns and order. We too use mathematics to understand and manipulate reality. We too, despite our advanced medical science, sometimes seek comfort in practices that go beyond purely physical treatment. Meditation, prayer, community support, holistic approaches that acknowledge the connection between mind and body, psychology and physiology. The Mesopotamians were our intellectual ancestors. Their curiosity, their systematic observation, their development of writing to preserve and transmit knowledge, these laid foundations for all subsequent science and mathematics. When we engage in scientific inquiry, when we use mathematics to solve problems, when we look up at the stars with wonder, we follow paths first traced by ancient Mesopotamian scholars. Breathe deeply. Let your mind rest from its labours. You have journeyed far tonight through time and space, through cities and stories, through practical life and abstract thought. You have encountered gods and kings, scribes and farmers, artists and scientists. You have walked ancient streets, entered ancient temples, participated in ancient rituals. Now it is time to rest, time to let go of all this knowledge, to release the effort of attention, to sink into the welcoming darkness of sleep. The ancient world will still be there tomorrow, waiting for your return. But for now, let it fade, let it become dreamlike, let it carry you gently into unconsciousness. Your breathing slows, your muscles relax completely, your mind quiets, thoughts becoming fewer and farther between. You float in that peaceful space before sleep, not quite awake, not yet fully asleep, simply existing in the present moment, comfortable and secure. Part 11. The Akkadian Empire and Sargon. The great time flows forward. The Sumerian city-states, prosperous and advanced, nevertheless competed with each other constantly. Warfare was frequent, alliances shifted, fortunes rose and fell. No single city could achieve lasting dominance over all the others. Then, around 2334 BCE, everything changed. A man named Sargon, born in obscure circumstances, rose to become king of the city of Akkad. But Sargon was not content to rule just one city. He had grander ambitions. He would create something new, an empire uniting all of Mesopotamia under his rule. Sargon was a brilliant military leader. His armies conquered city after city, extending Akkadian control across the entire region from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. He defeated the powerful cities of Uruk, and Lagash. He campaigned into Syria and Anatolia. His empire was the largest the world had yet seen, binding together diverse peoples and cities under a single authority. The Akkadian Empire represented a fundamental shift in political organisation. Previously, power had been local, centred on individual cities and their hinterlands. Now, power was centralised, concentrated in a single capital, Akkad, from which the emperor ruled far-flung territories. This required new forms of administration, governors appointed to oversee distant provinces, regular communication between centre and periphery, standardised systems of taxation and tribute, military garrisons to enforce imperial authority. Sargon presented himself as the agent of the gods, bringing order and justice to a chaotic world. His royal inscriptions boast of his conquests, his wisdom, his divine favour. He claimed to have unified Mesopotamia not through naked aggression, but through righteous authority. bringing the blessings of civilization to all. How much of this propaganda reflects reality is debatable. Certainly Sargon's conquests involved considerable violence. Cities were besieged, captured, sometimes destroyed. Populations were displaced, tribute and taxes extracted. The empire was built on military might as much as on ideological claims. Yet the Akkadian Empire also brought benefits. It reduced intercity warfare. It facilitated trade across a vast area. It supported artistic and cultural achievements. The Akkadian language became a lingua franca, a common tongue for diplomacy and commerce, alongside Sumerian, which remained the language of religion and high culture. Imagine standing before Sargon in his throne room in Akkad. The room is vast, designed to impress and intimidate. Columns rise toward a high ceiling. Walls are decorated with scenes of royal triumph. Sargon receiving the submission of conquered kings. Sargon standing before the gods receiving their blessing. The king himself sits on a raised throne, dressed in magnificent robes, wearing a crown that proclaims his authority. You have come as an envoy from a distant city, bringing tribute and seeking favour. You prostrate yourself before the throne, touching your forehead to the floor in a gesture of absolute submission. Only when given permission do you rise and state your business. Sargon regards you with eyes that have seen much warfare and intrigue. He is not young, but neither is he feeble. Power radiates from him, the confidence of a man who has conquered the known world. When he speaks, his voice is firm, commanding immediate attention. He questions you about conditions in your city, about the harvest, about the mood of the people, about potential threats. He absorbs information, files it away, uses it to maintain control. He promises protection in exchange for loyalty, prosperity in exchange for tribute. The bargain is clear: submit and prosper, or resist and face destruction. You leave the presence feeling both awed and frightened. This is power on a scale you have never encountered. One man commanding the resources of an entire region. One will imposing order from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf. It is magnificent and terrible simultaneously. The Akkadian Empire lasted for about a century after Sargon, ruled by his descendants. But empires are fragile things, always threatened by internal decay and external enemies. The empire faced rebellions from conquered peoples, invasions from mountain peoples to the north and east, droughts and famines that destabilized the agricultural base. Finally, around 2150 BCE, the empire collapsed. Akkad itself was abandoned, its location eventually forgotten, still not definitively identified by modern archaeologists. The city-states of Sumer reasserted their independence. The grand experiment of empire ended in failure. Yet the idea of empire survived. Future rulers would look back to Sargon as a model, seeking to recreate his achievements, to unite Mesopotamia under a single authority. The dream of universal kingship, of one ruler bringing order to the entire world, would inspire Hammurabi, the Assyrian kings, Nebuchadnezzar, and ultimately Alexander the Great and the Romans. Part 12. The Ur-3 dynasty and the return of Sumerian power. From the ruins of the Akkadian Empire, a new power emerged. The city of Ur, ancient and venerable, rose to dominance around 2112 BCE, under a dynasty we call Ur-3. This was Sumer's last great flowering, a renaissance of Sumerian culture, art and political power. The founder of this dynasty was Ur-Nammu, a capable administrator and builder who brought order to southern Mesopotamia after decades of chaos. He is remembered for two great achievements: the construction of monumental ziggurats and the promulgation of one of the earliest law codes in history. The ziggurat at Ur, which we mentioned earlier, was Ur-Nammu's greatest architectural legacy. It rose in 3 massive tiers, each smaller than the one below, creating a mountain-like structure that dominated the landscape for miles around. The base measured about 200 feet by 150 feet, and the structure rose over 60 feet into the air, with the temple chamber at the summit adding additional height. Let yourself stand at the base of this ziggurat on a clear morning. The sun has just risen, its light striking the eastern face of the structure, turning the baked brick exterior golden. The scale is overwhelming. You must crane your neck back to see the top, where the temple chamber sits like a jewel in the sky. You begin to climb the main staircase, one of 3 that approach the first level. Each step is shallow but wide, designed for processional ascent during religious ceremonies. Your legs begin to burn as you climb higher and higher, the city spreading out below you. The houses become smaller, the streets less distinct. You can see the palm groves surrounding the city, the brown ribbon of the Euphrates in the distance, the flat agricultural land stretching to the horizon. At the first level, you pause to catch your breath. Here there are smaller staircases leading to the second level. You continue climbing, your respect for the builders growing with every step. The labour required to construct this monument was staggering. Millions of bricks, each one moulded by hand, dried in the sun or fired in kilns, carried to the site, laid in place with mortar. Thousands of workers toiling for years, fed and housed by the temple administration, organised in work gangs, supervised by foremen and architects. Why build something so massive, so impractical in purely functional terms? Because architecture is not just about function. It is about meaning, about making statements, about creating physical manifestations of belief and aspiration. The ziggurat proclaimed the power of the devotion of its people, the connection between earth and heaven. It was a prayer in brick, a ladder between worlds, a demonstration that humans could build toward the divine. At the summit, you finally reach the temple chamber. It is smaller than you expected, intimate despite the grandeur of the structure supporting it. The walls are whitewashed, brilliant in the sunlight. The air feels different here, thinner, charged with significance. This is where heaven and earth meet, where the moon god Nana descends to receive the devotions of his people. You look out over the city and land, seeing the world from the god's perspective. Everything is laid out below, small and manageable, ordered and comprehensible. For a moment you understand the appeal of divinity, the desire to rise above the chaos of earthly existence into realms of order and permanence. But you are mortal, and you must descend. The climb down is almost as arduous as the climb up, your legs shaking with effort by the time you reach ground level. Yet you feel accomplished, transformed by the experience. You have stood at the boundary between worlds. You have touched something sacred. Ur-Namma's other great legacy was his law code, one of the earliest written legal systems. Though earlier codes may have existed, Ur-Namma's is the oldest for which we have significant surviving text. It establishes principles that would echo through subsequent Mesopotamian law. The presumption that society operates under law, not arbitrary royal whim, the idea that punishments should be proportionate to offences, the protection of the weak against exploitation by the powerful. The code addresses a wide range of issues: property rights, marriage and divorce, inheritance, personal injury, theft, false accusations. It specifies fines for various offences, using a system of monetary compensation rather than the harsher eye for an eye approach that would appear in later Babylonian law. If a man breaks another man's bone, he pays a specified amount of silver. If a man divorces his wife without cause, he must pay compensation. If a man makes a false accusation, he suffers the punishment that would have been inflicted on the accused had the accusation been true. These laws reveal a society grappling with the complexities of urban life, trying to establish fairness and justice, protecting social order through codified rules. They are not perfect by modern standards. They reflect the hierarchical nature of Mesopotamian society, with different penalties for offences against people of different social classes. Women had fewer rights than men, though they were not without legal protection. Slaves were property, though even they had some minimal rights. Yet the very existence of such a code represents progress. It asserts that law should be public, known to all, not the secret knowledge of judges and priests. It provides a framework for resolving disputes without violence. It recognises that justice is a social necessity, that communities cannot function without agreed-upon rules governing behaviour. Under Ur-Nammu and his successors, the Earther state became highly bureaucratised. Tens of thousands of clay tablets survive documenting the minute details of temple and state administration. Every transaction was recorded, grain received and distributed, animals counted and tracked, workers assigned and paid, materials requisitioned and used. The administration knew exactly what resources it controlled, what labour it could mobilise, what obligations were owed and fulfilled. This bureaucracy allowed for impressive projects: the construction of ziggurats and temples, the maintenance of extensive canal systems, the support of large urban populations. But it also created rigidity, making the system vulnerable to disruption. When droughts came, when harvests failed, When invaders threatened, the elaborate administrative machinery struggled to adapt. Let yourself become a scribe in this bureaucracy, working in a corner of a vast archive room. Around you, shelves stretch from floor to ceiling, filled with tablets recording every transaction of the past years. The smell of clay fills the air, mixed with the earthen scent of the building itself. Your specific task today is to reconcile accounts from several outlying agricultural estates, ensuring that the grain they report delivering matches what the central storage facilities report receiving. Discrepancies must be investigated. Are they due to errors in record keeping, to theft, to spoilage during transport, to dishonest officials inflating their reports? You pull tablets from the shelves, arrange them on your work surface, consult them carefully. The numbers are written in cuneiform using the sexagesimal system. You calculate totals, compare figures, note discrepancies. When you find a problem, you make a notation on a tablet, which will be sent to a supervisor for further investigation. The work is tedious but essential. The entire system depends on accurate record keeping, on knowing exactly what resources are available, on preventing theft and corruption. Your labour, and that of hundreds of other scribes, keeps the machinery of state functioning smoothly. Hours pass. Your eyes grow tired from reading the tiny cuneiform signs. Your hand cramps from holding the stylus. But you persist, knowing that your work matters, that you are part of something larger than yourself, helping to maintain the order and prosperity of your civilization. The Earth-3 period lasted about a century, from around 2112 to 2004 BCE. At its height, it controlled most of southern Mesopotamia and extended its influence into surrounding regions. Trade flourished. The arts prospered. Sumerian literature was collected and codified. The great myths and epics were written down in their classic forms. But like all human creations, the Earth state was temporary. It faced increasing pressure from nomadic peoples, particularly the Amorites from the west and the Elamites from the east. Internal problems accumulated: droughts, administrative corruption, popular discontent. The system grew increasingly brittle, unable to adapt to changing circumstances. Finally, around 2004 BCE, Elamite invaders captured Ur itself. The last king Ibisin was taken prisoner and carried off to Elam. The dynasty ended. The city was devastated. A later Sumerian text, the Lament for Ur, describes the destruction in heartbreaking terms. Temples destroyed, people killed or enslaved, the great city reduced to ruins, the gods abandoning their shrines. This lament is not just historical record but profound poetry, expressing grief for a lost world. The poet describes the city's suffering in intimate detail: bodies lying unburied in the streets, survivors wandering homeless, the silence where once was bustling life. It is a meditation on impermanence, on the fragility of civilization, on the universal human experience of loss. Let yourself hear these ancient words, translated across millennia. The storm ordered by Enlil in hate, the storm which wears away the land, covered like a cloth, enveloped it like a linen sheet. On that day did the storm leave the city. That city was a ruin. O Father Nana, that town was left a ruin. The people groan. The lament goes on, verse after verse, chronicling the destruction, calling on the gods to return to restore what was lost. But the gods do not answer. The city lies in ruins. The dynasty is finished. The Sumerian Renaissance is over. Yet even in this catastrophe, there is paradoxical immortality. The lament itself survived, copied by later scribes, preserved in libraries, eventually excavated by archaeologists. The voice of grief from 4,000 years ago can still move us, can still communicate the essential human experience of loss and longing. Rest now with this knowledge. All things pass, all empires fall, all cities crumble. This is not cause for despair, but for appreciation. The fact that everything is temporary makes it precious. The brief flowering of civilization, the momentary triumph over chaos, the transient beauty of human achievement, these matter precisely because they do not last. You, too, are temporary. Your life is brief. Your accomplishments will be forgotten. Your very name will fade from memory. But right now, in this moment, you exist. You have consciousness. You can appreciate beauty, feel love, create meaning. This is enough. This is everything. Breathe deeply. Let go of the need for permanence. Accept the flowing nature of existence, the constant change that is the only constant. The ancient cities of Mesopotamia rose and fell. Civilizations emerged and disappeared. Yet life continued. Humanity endured. The story goes on. You are part of that story. Your moment matters. Your experience is valid. Your brief existence is a note in the great symphony of being, harmonizing with all that came before and all that will come after. Sleep approaches like a gentle tide. Let it carry you. Let yourself drift on waters that have flowed since time immemorial, that will flow long after you're gone. There is peace in acceptance, in releasing the desperate clutching at permanence, in allowing yourself to be part of the great river of existence. Part 13. Babylon and Hammurabi. After the fall of Ur, Mesopotamia fragmented again into competing city-states. New peoples entered the region, most notably the Amorites, Semitic-speaking groups from the Syrian desert who gradually settled in Mesopotamian cities, intermarrying with existing populations, adopting local culture while bringing their own influences. One of these Amorite dynasties established itself in Babylon, a city that had been relatively minor during the Sumerian period, but was well positioned geographically in central Mesopotamia. Under a series of capable rulers, Babylon grew in power and influence. Then, in 1792 BCE, a king named Hammurabi came to the throne. Hammurabi would reign for 42 years, and during that time he would transform Babylon from one power among many into the dominant force in Mesopotamia. He was a skilled diplomat, playing rival states against each other, forming and breaking alliances as advantage dictated. He was an effective military commander, leading armies to victory against stronger enemies through strategy and timing. And he was an able administrator, reforming the government, organising the economy, promulgating laws. But Hammurabi is best remembered for his law code, inscribed on a massive stone stele nearly 8 feet tall. At the top of the stele, a carved relief shows Hammurabi standing before Shamash, the sun god and god of justice, receiving the laws from divine hands. Below this image, 49 columns of text preserve 282 legal provisions, covering almost every aspect of Mesopotamian life. The Code of Hammurabi is more complete than earlier law codes, and offers us a detailed picture of Babylonian society. It addresses commercial transactions and property rights, family law and inheritance, criminal offences and personal injury, professional responsibilities and building codes. It specifies precise punishments for various offences, famously including the principle of lex talionis, the law of retaliation. If a man put out the eye of another man, his eye shall be put out. If he break another man's bone, his bone shall be broken. This seems harsh to modern sensibilities, but it represented an attempt at proportional justice, ensuring that punishment did not exceed the offence. It limited revenge, channeling it through legal process rather than allowing endless cycles of retaliation between families and clans. The code also reveals social stratification. Penalties differed depending on the social status of victim and perpetrator. If a nobleman injured a commoner, he paid a fine. If a commoner injured a nobleman, he suffered corporal punishment. This inequality was built into the legal system, reflecting and reinforcing the hierarchical nature of society. Yet the code also provided protections for the vulnerable. It set limits on interest rates that could be charged on loans, preventing excessive debt slavery. It regulated marriage and divorce, ensuring that women could not be casually abandoned without compensation. It specified minimum wages for various types of labour. It held professionals accountable for negligence. If a builder constructed a house that collapsed and killed the owner, the builder could be executed. Imagine yourself in Babylon during Hammurabi's reign, standing in the city square where the great stele has been erected for all to see. The stone is dark, basalt, transported from distant mountains at great expense. The cuneiform text is carved deeply, clearly readable even from a distance. Citizens gather around the stele, reading the laws, discussing their implications. A merchant checks the provisions regarding commercial contracts, ensuring he understands his rights and obligations. A woman inquires about divorce law, contemplating leaving an abusive husband. A labourer confirms the wages he's owed, preparing to confront an employer who has tried to cheat him. The stele is not just a legal document, but a statement of royal ideology. Hammurabi presents himself as the shepherd of his people, the defender of justice, the king who ensures that the strong do not oppress the weak. Whether he lived up to these ideals is debatable, but the ideals themselves are significant. They establish justice as a royal responsibility, law as the foundation of social order. Around you, Babylon bustles with activity. The city has grown wealthy under Hammurabi's rule. Tribute flows in from conquered cities. Trade caravans arrive from distant lands, bringing luxury goods and raw materials. The streets are crowded with people of many ethnicities: native Babylonians, Amorites, Sumerians, merchants from Syria and Anatolia, even travellers from more distant regions. The Ishtar Gate, though it would not reach its famous blue-glazed brick splendour until much later, already stands impressive, guarding the entrance to the main processional way. You pass through it into the city proper, where buildings rise 2 and 3 stories high, their mud brick walls plastered and whitewashed, their roofs flat and accessible. The Temple of Marduk, Babylon's patron god, dominates the religious quarter. Marduk was originally a local deity of little importance, but as Babylon rose to power, so did its god. Hammurabi promoted Marduk's cult, identifying the god with the older Enlil, claiming that Marduk now held supreme authority in the divine assembly. This theological innovation served political purposes. If Marduk was king of the gods, then Marduk's city, Babylon, and Marduk's king, Hammurabi, deserved corresponding supremacy among earthly cities and rulers. Religion and politics intertwined, each supporting the other, creating a unified ideology that justified Babylonian dominance. Let yourself enter the temple complex. The outer courtyards are open to all, places where ordinary people come to pray, make modest offerings, seek blessings. But as you penetrate deeper into the complex, the spaces become more restricted. Inner courtyards are accessible only to priests. The Holy of Holies, where Marduk's cult statue resides, is forbidden to all but the highest-ranking clergy. You stop in an outer courtyard, approaching a small altar where you can make your offering. You have brought a clay figurine, moulded by your own hands, representing yourself in prayer. You place it on the altar, positioning it to face the inner sanctum where the god dwells. This figurine will remain here, offering perpetual devotion on your behalf, maintaining your connection to the divine even when you cannot be present. You kneel, pressing your forehead to the ground, murmuring prayers. You ask for health, for prosperity, for protection against enemies and misfortune. You promise continued devotion, regular offerings, obedience to divine and royal law. The transaction is simple. You offer worship and obedience. The god offers blessing and protection. Rising, you feel lightened, reassured. You have fulfilled your religious obligations. The gods will look favourably upon you. Your life will proceed under divine protection. This belief provides comfort, structure, meaning. It transforms an arbitrary and often cruel world into an ordered cosmos where actions have consequences, where virtue is rewarded and vice punished, where suffering has explanation even if not justification. Babylon under Hammurabi represents a high point of Mesopotamian civilization. The city was not as large as Uruk had been at its peak, but it was prosperous, well-governed, culturally sophisticated. Literature flourished, with scribes copying ancient texts and composing new works. Art and architecture reached new heights. The sciences, particularly astronomy and mathematics, continued to develop. Yet even Hammurabi's empire proved temporary. His successors lacked his ability. Conquered cities rebelled. New enemies appeared. Within a century and a half, Babylon would be conquered by the Hittites, then would fall under Kassite rule. The first Babylonian dynasty, Hammurabi's dynasty, would end. But Babylon itself endured. The city would rise and fall repeatedly over the next 1500 years, sometimes dominant, sometimes subject to foreign rule, but always significant, always remembered. Its name became synonymous with civilization itself, with urban grandeur, with human achievement and human hubris. Breathe slowly. Feel the weight of history, the accumulated achievements and catastrophes of millennia. Babylon rose from insignificance to dominance. It promulgated laws that still influence legal thinking. It promoted a god who became central to Mesopotamian religion. It created art and literature that survived into modern times. And yet it too passed. The great Hammurabi died. His laws were forgotten for millennia until archaeologists recovered them. His empire fragmented and disappeared. The very language in which his laws were written ceased to be spoken, but something survived. The idea of written law accessible to all. The concept that justice should be systematic, not arbitrary. The belief that kings rule not by whim, but by responsibility to their people. These ideas, first clearly articulated in Hammurabi's code, became part of humanity's heritage, influencing all subsequent legal development. You inherit this tradition whether you know it or not. When you expect laws to be written and public, when you believe justice should be impartial and proportional, when you think rulers should be accountable, you echo ideas first clearly expressed in ancient Babylon. Let this connection comfort you. You are not adrift in meaningless time. You are part of a great conversation stretching back thousands of years, forward into an unknown future. The human project of creating justice, building civilization, seeking meaning, this continues. You participate in it simply by being human, by caring about fairness, by trying to live well. Sleep comes easier with this understanding. You are held by history, supported by the accumulated wisdom of generations. Rest now in that support. Let the ancient world fade into dream. Let consciousness dissolve into peaceful darkness. You are safe. You are connected. You belong to the great human story that began in Mesopotamia and continues still. Part 14. The Assyrian Empire. North of Babylonia, in the upper reaches of the Tigris River Valley, another great Mesopotamian power emerged, Assyria. The Assyrians traced their origins to the ancient city of Ashur, named after their national god. For centuries they were minor players, overshadowed by more powerful neighbours, but gradually they built strength, developing military capabilities that would make them the most formidable power in the ancient Near East. The Assyrian Empire reached its peak between the 9th and 7th centuries BCE. During this period, Assyrian kings conquered an empire stretching from Egypt to Persia, from Anatolia to the Persian Gulf. It was the largest empire the world had yet seen, ruling over diverse peoples and territories through a combination of military might, administrative skill, and calculated terror. The Assyrians were masters of warfare. They developed professional standing armies, highly trained and well-equipped. They pioneered military technologies, siege engines for attacking fortified cities, cavalry forces for rapid movement, iron weapons superior to the bronze weapons of their enemies. They organised logistics carefully, ensuring armies could campaign far from home for extended periods. But the Assyrians are perhaps most notorious for their brutality. Their own royal inscriptions boast of atrocities committed against enemies, cities destroyed, populations massacred or deported, prisoners impaled or flayed alive, pyramids built from severed heads. Whether these accounts are exaggerated or accurate, they served a purpose: to terrify potential rebels, to make resistance seem futile, to encourage submission without fight. Imagine yourself as an inhabitant of a city besieged by an Assyrian army. For weeks, the enemy has surrounded your walls, cutting you off from the outside world. Food supplies dwindle, water grows scarce, hope fades. From the walls, you watch the Assyrians prepare their assault. They have constructed siege towers, tall wooden structures on wheels that can be pushed against the walls, allowing soldiers to fight at wall-top level. They have built battering rams, massive beams capped with bronze or iron, housed in protective sheds. They have engineers digging tunnels under the walls trying to collapse them. The assault begins at dawn. Arrows darken the sky, fired by thousands of archers. Soldiers push the siege towers forward while others advance with scaling ladders. The battering ram pounds against the gate, each impact shaking the walls. Defenders fight desperately, dropping stones and boiling oil on the attackers, firing arrows, desperately trying to hold. But the outcome is inevitable. The Assyrians are too strong, too numerous, too experienced. The gate splinters, the walls are breached, soldiers pour into the city. What follows is nightmare. Resistance is crushed with overwhelming force. The city's leaders are captured and executed, often in ways designed to serve as warnings to others. Much of the population is marched away into exile, to be resettled in distant parts of the empire where they will be easier to control, less likely to rebel. The city itself may be partially destroyed, its fortifications dismantled, its autonomy ended. This was the Assyrian method. Overwhelming military force combined with deliberate terror, breaking the will to resist, incorporating conquered territories into an efficient administrative system. It was brutal but effective. For centuries, the Assyrian Empire dominated the Near East, growing ever larger, seeming invincible. Yet the Assyrians were not mere destroyers. They were also builders and patrons of culture. Their kings constructed magnificent palaces decorated with elaborate stone reliefs depicting royal hunts, military campaigns, religious ceremonies. These reliefs are artistic achievements of high order, showing keen observation of nature, sophisticated composition, technical skill in stone carving. The palace of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, built in the 7th century BCE, was particularly splendid. Its walls were lined with carved panels showing the king hunting lions, the ultimate royal sport. The lions are depicted with remarkable realism. Their muscular bodies, their flowing manes, their expressions of rage and pain. The king appears calm and heroic, mastering these, symbols of wild nature demonstrating his fitness to rule. Let yourself walk through these palace chambers in imagination. The scale is impressive. Rooms are vast, ceilings high, doorways flanked by protective spirits, winged bulls with human heads, massive stone guardians combining human intelligence with animal strength and bird-like swiftness. Their eyes seem to follow you as you pass. The reliefs tell stories in sequence, like a graphic novel carved in stone. Here, the king departs for the hunt, accompanied by attendants and hunting dogs. Here, lions are released from cages, the hunt beginning. Here, the king draws his bow, arrows flying toward charging lions. Here, fallen lions sprawl in death, while others are pierced by spears. Finally, the king offers libations over the dead lions, honouring their courage even as he demonstrates his supremacy. The message is clear. The king is powerful, divinely favoured, capable of mastering chaos and danger. His rule brings order to a disordered world. Submission to him is not shameful but wise, accepting the natural order of things. Ashurbanipal was not just a warrior but also a scholar. He assembled the great library at Nineveh, collecting texts from throughout his empire. Myths and epics, medical and magical texts, astronomical observations, historical records, correspondence. Scribes were sent to copy important texts from temple libraries in conquered cities, bringing knowledge to Nineveh where it could be preserved and studied. This library is one of Ashurbanipal's greatest legacies. When archaeologists excavated Nineveh in the 19th century, they found thousands of tablets from this library buried in the ruins. These tablets preserved Mesopotamian literature, allowing us to read the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Enuma Elish, and countless other works. Without Ashurbanipal's library, much of what we know about ancient Mesopotamia would be lost. Even conquerors and destroyers, it seems, can be preservers. Even military empires can patronize learning. Human beings are complex, capable of both terrible cruelty and remarkable achievement, sometimes embodied in the same individuals and institutions. Rest for a moment in this complexity. Do not judge too quickly. Do not reduce the past to simple moral lessons. The Assyrians were brutal, yes, but they were also sophisticated, cultured, capable of creating beauty and preserving knowledge. They were human, like us, containing multitudes, shaped by their circumstances, doing what seemed necessary or right given their assumptions and values. This does not excuse their atrocities. It does not make their victims' suffering less real. But it prevents us from reducing them to cartoon villains, from pretending that evil is always obvious and simple. The capacity for both good and evil exists in all people, all cultures, all times. Understanding this is part of wisdom. The Assyrian Empire, despite its power, eventually fell. Its very size and brutality created enemies, everywhere. Subject peoples hated their overlords, waiting for opportunity to rebel. When the empire weakened, when succession disputes divided Assyrian leadership, when new enemies appeared, rebellion spread like wildfire. In 612 BCE, a coalition of Medes and Babylonians besieged Nineveh itself. The great capital, which had seemed impregnable, fell after a brutal siege. The city was thoroughly destroyed, its palaces burned, its population killed or scattered. The Assyrian Empire, which had dominated the Near East for centuries, essentially ceased to exist within a few years. The fall was sudden and complete. Later writers expressed amazement at how thoroughly this great power had vanished. The prophet Nahum, writing in the Hebrew Bible, celebrated Nineveh's destruction. Woe to the city of blood, full of lies, full of plunder, never without victims. The oppressor had finally been overthrown, yet even in its fall, Assyria left legacies. Its administrative methods influenced later empires. Its art influenced subsequent Near Eastern culture. Its libraries preserved knowledge that would have otherwise been lost. And its history provides lessons about power and its limits, about the costs of empire, about the inevitable cycle of rise and fall. Breathe deeply. All power is temporary, all empires fall. The mighty Assyrians, who seemed invincible, were destroyed within a generation. The beautiful palaces, the impressive libraries, the carefully maintained administrative records, all burned or were buried under rubble. Yet something survived. The stone reliefs were recovered by archaeologists, now displayed in museums worldwide. The library tablets were excavated, deciphered, published. The story of Assyria continues to be told, offering insights and warnings to later generations. Nothing lasts in its original form. Everything changes, transforms, passes away. But traces remain. Memory persists. The past shapes the present in ways both obvious and subtle. You are affected by Assyrian history even if you know nothing about it, because that history influenced subsequent developments, created patterns and precedents, contributed to the river of human civilization that flows through time. Let yourself float on that river now. Let the ancient world wash over and through you. You have journeyed far tonight, witnessed the rise and fall of empires, walked through ancient cities, encountered gods and kings, workers and scribes. You have seen humanity in all its complexity, its cruelty and compassion, its violence and creativity, its striving and its ultimate fragility. Sleep approaches like a sunset, gradually darkening the sky, bringing gentle night. Do not resist. Let consciousness fade. Let thoughts slow and stop. Let your body rest completely, held by the same earth that held the ancient Mesopotamians, watched by the same stars, part of the same great story that began with those first cities between the rivers and continues still into an unknown future that will someday become past, adding its own chapter to the endless human narrative. Rest now. Sleep now. The ancient cities of Mesopotamia have shared their stories. They have opened their secrets to you. You have walked their streets in imagination, touched their clay tablets, stood before their temples. Now let them fade into dream. Let them carry you gently into deep, peaceful, restorative sleep. Good night, dear traveller. May your dreams be peaceful, your rest complete, your sleep sweet and undisturbed. The lost cities of Mesopotamia watch over you across the millennia, silent now, but not forgotten, never forgotten.